Yeah, it is a good question, and I guess it is a hard impasse to really break through, just given the prevalence of like uh, the Western system of knowledge and how it's spread through like elite academic institutions and all that. And it is sort of the language of power to be able to speak this language or to be able to use these terms, to be able to wield these concepts. For example, like when I was studying anthropology and back in 2018, I was quite interested in what this trend in anthropology called the ontological turn, and it was about exploring just the different ways of being of not only indigenous of indigenous peoples. Um, and for example, I read in I think it was called Earth Beings, where an anthropologist studied indigenous people in Peru. I think it was Peru. But in Earth Beings, if for the indigenous people that he studied, uh, mountains or these Earth beings, as they call them, participated in history. They had agency to change history. And let's, I mean, if you were go up if you were to like speak to a policymaker and say, like you have to account for the agency of mountain these Earth beings, then it just doesn't have currency in a lot of places. So yeah, there is just this power dynamic that is hard to reconcile.
One thing I kind of that I appreciate, I think that this reminds me of, right? Like this, like, oh, by going decolonization, does that, kind of pull us into the world of colonization? Like it reminds me of Adam Kahane's kind of power, love, and justice, and for radical collaboration. And the way he defined justice is not so much, he says basically people don't know what justice is, but they know what injustice is. And so I think that might, for me, that kind of helps reconcile a little bit, right? It's not about like the opposite of something, but he says that like love, power, and justice are all kind of like innate to the human condition. And so for radical collaboration, it's all about unblocking that. And so it's like to your point about the ontological turn, which I don't know what that is, but I do think it's like a way of being, right? You can feel that injustice is happening. And so you can feel when colonization is happening. And I maybe it even transcends language, right? Like to see injustice or to experience injustice, and therefore I'm just drawing parallels to colonization there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but for me, just given my like intellectual background, I think of like concepts like justice and a lot of these other um, things that we might think of it as being innate, as being cultural constructs, just because I studied anthropology. So it's just, I'm not saying like you're wrong or anything, but for me, that kind of is just not how I think. So justice, the way we use justice and the way we think about justice, I think is like a historically and culturally specific definition and use of the term.
Would you like to hear his definition of, or like kind of implications of like what? So like for just to kind of add to what he says about justice, it's kind of like the impact of injustice is that people and how it relates to power, right? So power isn't power over, it's power to, right? And so when injustice is occurring, it blocks, it kind of removes people's power to act, power to realize themselves. And so I like your perspective. I have no idea where the cultural influences in that, and so maybe that's where I need to decolonize my own mind. But it's like like power to realize itself and not having the power when to Dater's point in your presentation, right? About there's people who have more power and are blocking the power of others to realize themselves, right? I see that's kind of how that's kind of where my mental model is right now with that, and I'd love to understand where the cultural influence is at. Where's like the social construct in that?
Well, there's a really famous debate between Michel Foucault and Noam Chomsky just about this topic, and I recommend that you listen to it. It's like an hour long, but they both occupy like these two different perspectives. Maybe justice as being something that comes from human nature versus something that's historically and culturally created. And I think that watching the debate will maybe inform you of how I think about this very particular question in a much better way than I could discuss it myself.